They asked for my ID right there next to the flag I'd just finished planting for a fallen friend. Name's Lou Canfield, 79, retired Marine. Though the smell of cold coffee and that cracked porch chair didn't seem to prove much. Funny how a patch can start a storm. Ever been mistaken for someone you used to be, sir? I'm going to need to verify that patch. Officer Brett said, one hand already on his radio. Lou Canfield didn't turn right away. He dropped the last sack of leaves by the cemetery gate, brushing a few stubborn maple curls off the shoulder of his worn green jacket. That jacket had seen desert heat, and freezing airlifts served as a blanket, a pillow, a shield. For nearly 4 decades now, it had been part of him, especially every November 11th. A silent badge. He'd worn that patch every Veterans Day since '85. This time, someone decided to question it. The air was cool, barely 58 degrees, and a light fog hung over hollow pines, softening the edges of tombstones and telephone poles. Gold and amber leaves scattered across the sidewalk, crunching under Lou's old boots. Across the street, Annie's porch had its American flag up early this year. A familiar voice called out from the patio. "Mornin', Lou!" "Black coffee," Rita asked, drying a mug with a dish rag. Lou gave her a nod, a quiet smile on his lips. He didn't talk much, never had, but the regulars in Hollow Pines had learned to read the way his eyes crinkled when he was pleased. He took his usual seat on the wooden bench by the picket fence, sipping his coffee as the town stirred to life. The clink of breakfast plates from Annie's, the far-off bark of a dog, the soft hum of someone sweeping their porch. Ordinary things. Lou finished his drink, stood, and walked toward the narrow gravel lot behind the cemetery. 2 veterans. Parking-only signs leaned slightly, the posts old and listing. He adjusted one of them with a grunt, straightening it by habit more than pride. That's when the cruiser pulled up. The door creaked. Boots stepped onto the pavement. "Sir, I'm going to need to verify that patch." Lou turned slow and steady. This one officer, Brett Mallon, was young, barely 30 by the look of him. His badge was polished uniform, pressed like a catalog photo. But it was the tension in his jaw that caught Lou's attention. The kid wasn't just doing his job. He was convinced. "Yes, sir. We've had some issues with stolen valor lately. I'll need to see some kind of military ID or discharge papers." Lou reached for his wallet. The ID he pulled out was worn at the edges, laminated before digital anything. The photo had faded nearly to a smudge. It read, "Canfield Lewis J., USMC." Brett studied it. "This is pretty old. Do you have discharge documents on you?" Lou shook his head. "Not with me." The officer stepped back slightly and pressed the mic on his shoulder. "I'm going to need to write you up, sir. It's just procedure. You understand." Across the street, a woman with a notepad paused. Maggie Torres had been covering small-town feel-good stories for the Hollow Pines daily blog, and today she'd just wanted a few notes on local holiday prep. But now her pen hovered and her phone recorder slipped into her hand. From her vantage point near the hedge, she could see the strain in Brett's posture and the stillness in Lou's. A teenage passerby raised their phone and started recording. People noticed things more these days. Lou didn't argue. He didn't puff up or storm off. He just nodded, his eyes drifting toward the iron cemetery gates behind him. "I do understand," he said, his voice flat and low like gravel under tired boots. The report was short. Brett read it aloud like a script, then held it out. Lou signed it without blinking. No one shouted. No one interfered. But the quiet felt heavier than yelling ever could. Rita stepped outside, tray in hand, and froze. Maggie raised her brows at the waitress. "He's been around longer than the street signs," Rita said under her breath. "Never caused trouble." Maggie made a note. Later that evening, Lou's house stood quiet at the edge of Millridge Lane. It was a small place, modest white clapboard, a porch swing out front, chrysanthemums blooming in neat rows. No flags, no bumper stickers, no signs. Lou locked the door behind him and walked past the living room straight into his little study. The walls were bare except for one faded photo of a squad in desert gear. A simple desk sat by the window. He pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside was a single manila envelope. The edges were worn and soft, like it had been opened and closed 100 times. On the upper left corner, written in blue ink, Captain J.R. Weller, Beirut, 1983. The envelope was thin, cream-colored, and stamped Municipal Court. Lou stood still for a long moment, the screen door swinging shut behind him with a faint clatter. Rain tapped gently on the porch roof, a patient rhythm that seemed to echo the hollow inside his chest. He turned the envelope over once, then again, and finally slid it between the pages of an old photo album, where the spine had started to split. On the entry table beside the album sat a dented tin mailbox, the kind painted like a red barn, with fading stickers of horses and yellow suns. Inside, he kept only two things: a letter from his son, dated 1992, and a bundle of postcards from a woman named Elise, each one signed "Love Always." He didn't open the box today, just brushed dust from the lid with his sleeve. Outside, the rain deepened. The sky had that solid, pale gray tone of early November in the south, and the air held a bite that went straight to the knees. Through the front window, Lou could see the edge of the cemetery, where stones leaned gently into the ground like tired shoulders. Somewhere in town, a church bell rang. Noon. He walked into the kitchen. The room was neat, painfully neat. Counters bare except for a percolator, one chipped mug, and a wooden spoon. The round table had only one chair pulled out. He placed the unopened summons in the center, aligned with the grain of the wood, then stepped back as though it might accuse him aloud. Upstairs, the grandfather clock ticked solemnly. At that very moment, Maggie Torres sat in her car outside Annie's porch. The video still paused at frame 23. She tapped the screen and watched Lou's face again, as Officer Brett had demanded. ID watched the way the man's jaw didn't clench, didn't shift. There had been no tremble in his voice, no flinch, just calm acceptance, but not indifference. She rewound it again. His fingers holding that battered ID had been perfectly still. Her grandmother's voice had echoed in her mind all morning. Sometimes silence hides the best stories, she'd said last night over the phone, the rustle of yarn and knitting needles steady in the background. "Grandma, you ever heard of a guy named Lou Canfield?" Maggie had asked. "Not personally, but if he's from the Corps..." "Look closer, not louder." Now Maggie was doing just that. Back at her apartment, she bypassed social media and fired up an old veterans forum her college roommate had once used for a story. It hadn't been updated in years, but the threads were still active, like whispering into an empty church and hearing someone reply. She typed, "Anyone know a Lewis Canfield, Hollow Pines SC, Marine Patch? Quiet guy. Just trying to verify his story." For hours there was nothing. She left her desk, made a sandwich, came back. Still nothing. Then just as she considered logging off, one reply blinked into view. "If it's Lewis Canfield from 2nd Recon, then that man carried us out of hell in Beirut." No name, no further detail. Maggie's heart thudded faster. She pulled out her notebook, no laptop for this part, just pen and paper. Something about Lou made digital feel too harsh. She wrote the line down, dated the page, drew a shaky square around it. She picked up the phone and called the local VFW hall. A raspy voice answered. "Post 3879. Hi. I'm a reporter with the Hollow Pines blog. I'm trying to verify something about a veteran named Lewis Canfield. Silence. You said Canfield, the voice finally asked. Stay on the line. Maggie sat up straighter. Rain rattled lightly against her window. The line clicked, and then another voice came through, older, gravel thick. You found him. He was our sergeant. And he saved my life. That's him, Earl Dunlap whispered, pointing to the faded photo. The man in the middle with the blood on his sleeves. The picture trembled slightly in his hand. Maggie leaned in her fingers, cold, despite the sunlight, slipping in through the tall front windows of the Red Oak Cafe. The oak table between them smelled faintly of lemon oil and old tobacco. Outside, the air was brisk, but inside, warmth came from more than just the space heater humming in the corner. It was the voices, the stories, the lived weight of memory that filled the place. Are you sure? Maggie asked, voice low. Earl nodded, eyes never leaving the photo. I carried that with me for nearly 40 years. Thought it was time to show someone. The cafe's old radio, an analog box perched beside the napkin dispensers, hummed out, Stand By Me, the volume just shy of sentimental. A few booths down, two other older men played checkers and didn't look up. The manager, a broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut and marine tattoo peeking out from under his sleeve, poured coffee quietly in the background, casting an occasional glance at their table with polite interest. Earl set the photo flat. 3 young Marines crouched in the frame, uniforms, wrinkled faces, hollowed by something that had nothing to do with fatigue. The man in the middle was Lou. His eyes looked both nowhere and everywhere, and his sleeves were soaked through. There was no mistaking him. He pulled us out one by one, Earl murmured. Bomb hit the barracks. Beirut 83. Whole place came down like wet matchsticks. Lou went back in after the second blast. I remember I was under a steel beam, my leg busted in 3 places. Thought I was done. Then I heard him say, Don't you go quiet on me, Dunlap. Next thing I knew, I was outside, breathing. Maggie clicked on her recorder without saying a word. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask. Earl's voice didn't need questions. 5 of us made it because of him. You won't find a record. Warehouse burned with the papers a week later. Insurance report blamed faulty wiring. Marines said it was an act of war. Whatever it was, Lou never talked about it again. Not once. The cafe had a quiet pulse, a rhythm Maggie had only ever felt in places that understood time not as a measure of hours, but of what had been endured. He never wore medals, she asked. Earl shook his head. Didn't have to. We wore his memory. There was silence between them, filled only by the clink of ceramic and the low creak of a fan. Maggie took down notes in her paper journal, the one she'd been carrying since this all started. She flipped to a blank page and wrote 3 words in bold Beirut. 1983. Lou. Do you know a James Weller? She asked suddenly. Earl looked up. Weller, his eyebrows rose. James, sure. He was a corporal then, barely out of boot camp. They bunked 2 doors down from ours. After the blasts, we didn't see him again for days. Rumor was he got hit in the shoulder, medevaced out. Maggie's breath quickened. He owes Lou everything, Earl said, then took a sip of his coffee, now lukewarm. Back at her apartment later that afternoon, Maggie dug through an old local news archive. A 2011 story buried behind paywalls had listed General James R. Weller as one of the keynote speakers at a Memorial Day event in D.C. His office contact had been listed then, a generic Department of Defense domain. The email wasn't supposed to work anymore, but she typed out a message anyway. Subject, Lewis Canfield, Beirut, 1983. General Weller. I'm a reporter from Hollow Pines. I've spoken with a man named Earl Dunlap about a Marine named Lewis Canfield. I believe he saved your life in Beirut. Mr. Canfield has received a court summons due to a misunderstanding regarding his service. I'm trying to confirm his identity and history before things go any further. Any help would mean a great deal. Respectfully, Maggie Torres. She read it twice, hesitated a third time, then hit send. By midnight, there was nothing. By 1:30 a.m., still nothing. She left the desk light on and dozed off on the couch, her notebook open on her chest. At 2:17 a.m., her phone buzzed once. She rubbed her eyes and stared at the screen. Tell him. I'm sorry I waited this long. General Weller entered the courtroom like a man stepping onto a battlefield, measured, unreadable. His coat was simple dark wool over a navy sweater, slacks creased sharp enough to suggest he still made his own bed each morning. No medals, no ribbons, just his hands folded tight behind his back as he took a seat near the rear, silent and still. Outside, a cold wind tugged at the edges of the American flags that townsfolk had tucked into coat pockets and jacket buttons. It was November 8th, and hollow pines had shown up. Retired teachers, gas station owners, one man who ran the bait shop by the river. They filled the wooden benches, some with thermoses in their laps, all watching quietly. The courthouse itself smelled faintly of lemon polish and history. Wood creaked under slow footsteps. On the wall behind the judge's bench hung a framed copy of the Constitution, yellowed around the edges, beside an official portrait of the current president. The room wasn't tense, but it was heavy. Lou sat alone at the defendant's table, shoulders squared under his old green field coat. There was no lawyer beside him, just the sound of his breath, steady as though he were back in formation. Officer Brett stood confidently crisp in uniform, his paperwork laid out in a neat row. He had the body cam footage queued on a flash drive, a binder labeled Incident 11-1 tucked beneath his arm. The judge, a tall woman in her 50s with silver rings on 3 fingers, adjusted her glasses and nodded. Proceed. Brett spoke clearly, presenting the incident as a matter of protocol. He referenced public concern about impersonation, emphasized respect for service, and then played the video. There on the screen, Lou appeared, calm, unmoving. The clip was short, but it echoed in the wood-paneled room. The line, "Sir, I'm going to need to verify that patch cut clean." Brett paused. The defendant presented an expired ID. No VA registration on file. We proceeded with standard citation under stolen valor enforcement guidelines. Lou's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet. I wore it because I earned it. There was no echo, only stillness. From the press row, Maggie's pen stilled against her notebook. She'd tried to submit a sworn statement from Earl Dunlap that morning. It was dismissed hearsay out of jurisdiction. She bit her tongue as the paper was filed away without a glance. Her eyes drifted to the back row. General Weller hadn't moved. His hands were now on his knees. His eyes cast forward, not on the judge, not on Brett. On Lou. Lou turned slightly, just enough to meet that gaze. Weller dipped his head, not in greeting, not in apology, in something older, deeper, then looked away. When the judge asked if there were any final comments before recess, her voice softened, not out of sympathy, but awareness. Is there anyone who wishes to speak for the defense? A breath passed. Lou did not raise his hand, but Weller did, briefly. He pushed back his seat, stood halfway. Every head in the room turned. Maggie sat up straight. Then he sat again. The bench creaked beneath him. Lou didn't flinch. He merely turned to the judge and said, "I'll come back when you need me to." The judge nodded. "Court is in recess." People stood slowly. Coats pulled on, boots shuffled. A man with a Marine Corps cap held the door open for a woman using a cane. Maggie stayed seated a few moments longer. Then she gathered her notes and slipped into the hall. General Weller was already there, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor tiles. "You could have said something," she said quietly. "I'm not ready," he replied. Then he looked at her, voice steady but lower. "But I will be." Lou unfolded the old flag on his porch table. The corners trembled more than his hands did. The fabric was worn threadbare at the edges, its colors dulled by years of South Carolina sun. But it held. Like him. He ran his fingers gently along the white stars, each one stitched with the kind of care people don't find much anymore. His eyes didn't water, not quite. They just stayed fixed. The porch light glowed soft and yellow above him. A slow tune drifted from the little tabletop radio, Ben E. King's Stand By Me, faint with static. The breeze picked up slightly, swaying the flag in the flower pot beside him. Maggie had noticed that flag yesterday, placed upright in the soil next to a potted fern. Lou didn't remember planting the fern. Maybe his wife had. Inside the house smelled of old pine wood and coffee. The floorboards creaked even under Lou's careful steps. He bent down beside the side table near the bookshelf and opened a small wooden box lacquered with brass corners, polished by time, not effort. Inside, resting atop a faded photograph of a woman with dark eyes and a little boy with a gap-toothed grin, was a letter. The envelope was ivory-colored, the handwriting unmistakably hers. "You were always their shield," it read just above her signature. He'd read those words every Veterans Day since she passed. Sometimes he spoke them aloud, just once, then folded the letter back. Tonight he did not fold it. Instead, he set it beside the summons, binding both with a thin piece of twine. On the edge of town, Maggie sat at her desk, surrounded by paper. Her laptop glowed in the darkened room, illuminating the edges of old printouts, handwritten notes, and a black and white photo Earl had given her. The man in the center, blood on his sleeves, calm under chaos. Lou Canfield. She reread her headline for the 5th time, The Forgotten Patch. Below it, a subheading, When Honor Doesn't Wear Medals. She'd wrestled with the phrasing. Not for drama, but truth. Earl's voice echoed in her ears as she replayed the recording. He didn't wear medals, but we wore his memory. And her grandmother's voice from a call earlier, Dan du, kong kan chung min na, chi kan duk nyo den dung luk. Maggie adjusted the collar of her faded blue shirt, old denim, one of her grandmother's favorites from the days when she still worked hospital shifts. Somehow it felt like armor tonight. With a breath, she hit publish. The article went live at 9:17 p.m. She didn't expect a response, but within minutes, the blog server pinged, first from Hollow Pines, then Greenville, then further. By 10:02, Honor Hollow Pines appeared on a veteran forum. At 10:47, a retired Air Force colonel commented, "This man walked through hell with my brother. Don't let the town forget." Maggie didn't sleep. She emailed the full article photos and recordings to an old mentor at the Charleston Times. Then she waited. At 1:33 a.m., she got an email back. Already reading. Stay close. Lou had returned to the porch by then, letter and summons tied placed atop the flag. He didn't notice the wind picking up. At 2:03 a.m., an email arrived in the inbox of the Hollow Pines Municipal Court. It bore the seal of the Department of Defense. The body was brief. Lewis Canfield, former gunnery sergeant, USMC, confirmed as unit leader, 2nd Recon, Beirut, 1983. Service record attached. Official commendation pending reissue. Attached was a letter signed by General James R. Weller. The language was formal, But the final paragraph read like breath. I regret my silence. What Sergeant Canfield did was beyond duty. It was honor. Maggie was rubbing her eyes when the phone buzzed. 2:31 a.m. Unknown caller. She hesitated, then answered. I need you to be there on the 11th, Weller said. His voice cracked faintly, as though something long buried had finally surfaced. She said nothing for a moment, then whispered, I will. Before we begin, said the judge, General Weller has requested the floor. There was a moment's pause. Not the hesitant kind, but the weighty kind, when an entire room holds its breath, not from suspense but reverence. General James R. Weller stood slowly, the glint of 4 stars on his chest, catching the morning light that poured through the arched windows of the Hollow Pines Municipal Court. Veterans Day had dawned clear and proud. The sun warmed the brick outside where school children waved small flags, and the high school band played Sousa's Liberty Bell. Inside the courtroom was full rows of students, townspeople, and a half-dozen reporters filled the wooden benches. Lou Canfield sat in the defendant's chair, spine straight, marine patch freshly stitched onto his old jacket. His hands rested on his knees, still and silent. His eyes, however, watched Weller approach with the same focus he'd once used when scanning a combat zone. Weller took the stand, placed his cap under one arm, and turned to face the judge and then Lou. I will not waste your time with titles or formalities, he began, his voice firm, but lined with gravel. 39 years ago, I was a young lieutenant stationed in Beirut. Our compound was hit before dawn. Chaos, fire, screaming. I remember only one clear thing: someone dragging me through debris, shielding me with their own body, refusing to stop until every man within reach was pulled to safety. He looked directly at Lou. That man was Gunnery Sergeant Louis Canfield. The room was still. Even the wooden benches seemed to creak quieter. I was too young then to understand the price of silence, Weller continued, and too old now not to regret it. This town mistook a patch for pretense. But what you see here, what he wears, isn't fabric. It's earned in blood, in sacrifice, and in silence maintained out of humility, not deceit. He turned fully toward Lou. I owe you my life, and I am sorry it took this long to say so. Then slowly, Weller stepped back, heels together, and raised his hand in a perfect salute. For a moment, no one moved. Then, almost as if a wind swept through the room, people rose, students, veterans, townsfolk. One by one they stood. No one was instructed to. They simply did. Even the judge, eyes glassy, pushed back her chair and joined them. In the silence, Lou stood too. His hand trembled slightly as he returned the salute. Not out of weakness, but because sometimes when the weight is finally lifted, the body doesn't know what to do without it. The judge's gavel came down gently. This court recognizes the error and hereby dismisses all charges against Mr. Canfield, she said. And let the record show, honor not appearance defines a veteran. There was no need for applause. But it came anyway, gentle at first, then swelling. A teacher wiped her cheek. A high schooler clutched his little flag like it meant something now. And from the front row, a small boy stepped forward, guided by his mother. He carried something folded. The boy reached. Lou looked up with bright brown eyes and held out a perfectly triangled flag. I saved this from last year, he whispered. It should be yours. Lou didn't speak. His throat had closed up too tight for words. He took the flag, held it to his chest, and nodded, a single tear tracking down the side of his face. That evening, the sun dipped behind the treetops, casting long gold across the porch where Lou sat. The breeze was gentle, the kind that knew when to whisper and when to leave things unsaid. He'd placed the flag, not folded this time, in its full shape on the small pole beside the fern. It fluttered against the darkening sky, catching every last bit of fading light. He didn't sit stiffly anymore. Just quietly, his hand resting on the arm of the chair, where once long ago his wife had sewn a little patch for him. Somewhere down the street, a car radio played "America the Beautiful." The melody floated faintly through the autumn air. At the Red Oak Cafe the next morning, Maggie placed a photo frame behind the counter, a black and white shot of two young Marines' arms slung across each other's shoulders, Beirut behind them. Above it, a note: "We still remember." Sometimes all it takes is a quiet room and a folded flag to remind a town what dignity really looks like. Lou never asked for recognition, just the space to remember and be remembered. In a world quick to judge by uniforms and headlines, his story teaches us that honor often walks in silence until the right heart dares to speak up. Like a porch light left on at dusk, a quiet act of kindness can guide us through the darkest doubts. If this story stirred something in you, consider passing its warmth along to someone who may have been overlooked.